Hey everyone, Professor Snart checking in as we get away from our first workshop, which was Unit 5, the kind of two due date things going on. So we're back to a more normal unit, I guess, with just the one due date, Unit 6. And this is the sort of nature of the course. Because it's an introduction to creative writing, very broadly speaking, we actually move away from fiction now. So unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to really work with revisions that you might do on the fiction that you've submitted and now got feedback on, nor do we have the opportunity just yet necessarily to write yet another story to really practice, some of the stuff that we've learned. And again, this is where it's good to remember that writing is a craft or a skill. It's not something that you're necessarily just naturally good at, like you might be right-handed or left-handed. That's something you're pretty much born with. And I think a lot of people feel the same way about writing. You're just good at it naturally or you're not. But that, is really not the case for us, and certainly not how we want to be treating the course, because it's one of those things like riding a bike. You're not born with that ability, but you learn it, and of course, how do you get better? Well, you practice it. So now is really a good time to remind yourself that we're interested in the craft of writing and that we both can get better and, of course, thinking about, well, how do we get better? And we now have the opportunity to move away from the fiction genre into a slightly different genre. But a lot of the things that we've been talking about and looking at really still apply in terms of good writing. So it's not like we have to learn a whole new set of skills, even though the genre that we're writing in begins to shift a little bit. So we now get into a genre called creative nonfiction, which is a really tricky one, but I think interesting for that very reason. It's like fiction in as much as it is, it's not entirely made up, but it does look for the kind of symbolic importance of things and uses language in a literary kind of way, but it's based more or less on truth, on things that have actually happened. So it's creative like a short story would be, but it's nonfiction like something that's in a newspaper might be, theoretically speaking at least. So it's an odd mix of those two things. Before we get into the workshop unit for that genre, though, we're going to work through a couple of units that really get us thinking about what creative nonfiction actually is. So the first one is Unit 6, which tries to sort of transition us from fiction to nonfiction and has this really nice video of a reading that was at COD, and it features an author who's primarily creative nonfiction, which is kind of where we want to go, and an author who is more fiction, like we've just written for the past unit. So it's a nice kind of bridge unit that we're working on here. The assignment is very straightforward. It's just a brief discussion board here. The only thing that I'll just kind of remind you of here is that one of the things that I'm looking for is obviously evidence that you've really watched the whole video and kind of paid attention to the whole thing. So in your responses that are required here for the discussion board, make sure that you make specific references to time moments or timestamps within the video, like at the 2:45 point, one of the authors says something like that, So you're really sort of engaged with it. It really is not a heavy workload unit here, so it does give us a bit of a chance to sort of catch our breath as we gear up for our next genre in our next workshop, which is not until Unit 8. But again, like you may have realized from the past unit or the past workshop, it's important to sort of know where that workshop unit's coming so you can begin writing and thinking about something, now rather than treating just that workshop unit as something that you would start once the other units are done before it. So it's kind of a pacing thing that you have to get used to. So you may want to check the due dates and the unit, setup here just to see where we're at. And again, this unit is really just kind of a transitional unit for us and is not really a heavy workload kind of a unit. So it's useful then to remind everybody about the workshop grading situation. Because, people are at various levels and again, have interests in various genres, the grading for the workshops is really not based on how quote-unquote good or not good your story or poem or whatever the workshop was. the grading's not based on the sort of quality of your work. At some level, I do want to see that you are engaged with course content and trying to apply that to what you're writing. But most of the grade is simply based on, did you post on time? Did you post as a file that people could access so the format was, accessible? And then the feedback portion, really the most important part, is did you post your feedback on time? And did you do so in the form of a file with comments throughout that people can actually use to improve, which really goes back to what I was saying before about, really keeping an eye on writing as a craft or a skill that we're looking to improve and that we can improve upon with practice. And so now using that workshop feedback, not just to think about how you might revise that particular story, but really how it might influence your writing more generally to become more effective. Do you need to be more concise, sometimes more clear? And that can be something as simple as, do you need to work on shorter sentences? Often when we write stories, as opposed to, say, more formal sort of school essays, we let ourselves get a little bit freer with sentence structure and, organization and all that kind of stuff. And while a short story is never going to be quite as formal as an academic essay, there's still elements of being concise and clear for your reader, of pacing, of organization, and all that kind of stuff. That's really important, because obviously you can have the greatest story in the world to tell, but if you put it out there in sentences that nobody can really follow, or the organization is so jumbled, and not intentionally jumbled or told out of order, but just kind of all over the place, that's a problem. It gets in the way of that great story that you have to tell. So again, really try to use the feedback you get from the workshop to think about the particular story that you've written, but are there kind of more general trends, right, that you might notice that you can now apply to your writing, no matter what the story is or what even the genre is. So what larger lessons can you learn from this? You'll also notice that most of the feedback I give is actually on the feedback that you've given, because like I've said a number of times, really the most important part of this course is you getting feedback from that group of your peer readers. There's very little that I could provide as feedback that wouldn't probably duplicate what's already in there, or that wouldn't really duplicate stuff that's already in the course that I would just be pointing you to again. So there's no real need for that. Having said that, though, if you would like particular or more particular feedback on the material you've submitted, then by all means just contact me, and we can work kind of individually in addition to what you're doing for the course, obviously, and I can provide maybe some more targeted kinds of feedback. Or if you have a question, especially based on some of the feedback that you got, and you're interested to know, is this good advice? Is it bad advice? Is there some rule that you didn't know about? Maybe I can clarify that for you. So I'm sort of out of the picture as far as individualized, like line by line feedback goes, as part of the workshop process. But just because the workshop's over doesn't mean that I'm still out of the process. I'm available, and you can contact me if you want to. Okay, so be sure to read that feedback that you got carefully. It doesn't mean you always have to agree with suggestions, but you do need to realize that they're there, and this is what at least one reader noticed in your work. And again, try to think big picture. Are there lessons to be learned that can improve you as a writer, beyond just, here's a couple of changes I could make to make this particular story better? Okay, and now we can transition into the slightly different genre of creative nonfiction, and we'll see ways in which it is fiction still, but also ways in which it's different from just the pure fiction that we've written for Unit 5. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, just be in touch with me, and otherwise I'll talk with everyone soon.